Much has been said these days about the need for leaders to be resilient in the face of a lot of the chaos and uncertainty that's going on in the business world. And that's true, I think, in big business and small business. Today, we're going to dive in and explore ways that you as a leader can do more for yourself so that you can lead others. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Well, hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you are listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, we are going to explore one aspect of being a leader, and that is leading yourself, finding your own time to recharge, build resilience, stay healthy, stay sharp of mind. I've got a guest who has spent a good bit of time studying that and putting information together about that. His name is Daniel Sih, and he is coming to us from Tasmania, I believe. Is that right, Daniel?
That's right. It's a long way away, isn't it?
It seems, but of course, over the airways, not so much. But thank you for enduring the time difference here to meet with me. And we happen to be capturing this where we are over a end of day timeline. I'm one day behind, and he's one day ahead. So it's always fun to look at that. Well, Daniel, again, welcome. So tell us a little bit about your journey, how you kind of came to be a spokesman for the passions that you're sharing with people these days.
Yeah, it's probably been a journey over, well, I'm in my 40s now, so a number of years. And I suppose just wrestling with a lack of space. I'm really passionate about helping busy people make space in the clutter of life to think and rest deeply and to connect with people and to do the stuff that I think makes us really healthy and happy. And so, I suppose over a number of different seasons of life, I've wrestled with extreme busyness. There was a point in my life, probably in my early 30s, where I nearly burnt out. And that's the closest I had been. I was running 3 jobs. I was a physiotherapy manager. Do you call them physical therapists in the States? So that was my first profession. And yet I was also doing lots of work with my church, and I was starting this business around productivity, and all of that combined with young kids and trying to build a house. It was just chaos. And it was the first time I kind of ran into my limits as a human and realized that actually, if you don't sleep enough, if you don't rest, if you don't create healthy patterns, you can actually not only lose your health and happiness, you can lose your physical kind of self. And I started getting breathless and anxious and a whole lot of other symptoms that took me probably about 18 months to overcome. That was probably one of the first steps. But either way, I've just become passionate about helping busy people make space and to manage their self in order to lead others.
I don't think anybody within the sound of our show here is going to disagree that it feels like the pace of life, the pace of business has gotten more accelerated. There's more uncertainty. There's more ambiguity in the work world around us, and it does create a lot of busy work. And I routinely run into people that are saying they feel like, even though they may only technically have one job, they feel like the load that has been given them is bigger than it's ever been. So this idea of finding space to take time and do all the right things, I'm going to dive right in. How do you encourage people to start that process?
Yeah, I agree with you in terms of the context that you've described. I mean, I'm in Australia and we're at the other side of the world, but I think the research is exactly the same and people's experience is the same post-COVID. A lot of people love working from home, being in hybrid working environments. There's flexibility and there's less commute and all that kind of stuff. And yet the research shows that we're getting a lot more meetings online than we ever had before. We have a lot more emails, so the volume is going up, as well as all the other channels, so Slack and Teams and Messenger, and just the pace of work and the competition of life in and around the instability of the political, geopolitical situation around us. Like all of that is causing tension. And the reason I suppose I want to reinforce what you said. I will answer your question, but the first part of the answer is I think we need to accept and acknowledge that this is how life is, and it's not going to change. That's a really important thing to realize, that actually we are now in an environment where there is more to do than we can possibly do. And in the 90s, Stephen Covey, the guru of productivity who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talked about big rocks and the idea of you've got to put your most important things in your calendar first, and then you can fit in all the small stuff around it. But then we got to a stage, I reckon, pre-COVID, where you could get in the big rocks if you put them in first, but then the little rocks would all fall out and you wouldn't be able to get a lot of the small stuff done because there wasn't time. And now Oliver Burkeman, in 4,000 weeks, says that actually you can't even get the big rocks in your bucket. Like, you're now competing between really good things and really good things. And I actually think that's worth acknowledging, because it changes our mindset. And for me, the big mindset change is actually there's going to be a lot of stuff that I can't put in my calendar. There's going to be a lot of stuff that I should be doing, or that I want to be doing, or that people want me to be doing, that I actually can't do. Even if I increase the size of my container and so I can put my rocks in, I am just going to burn out. And there's still going to be so many things to put in that I still will have stuff fall over. So the first step is acknowledging we live in this overflowing environment, and therefore I've got to be content with mess and with not completing everything, and being ruthless in putting the things that matter to me first intentionally. I'm happy to give more practical applications of that, but in my mind, it starts with acceptance. Yeah. Does that make sense, Doug?
It does. And as you were describing that, I'm reminded there's a term that has been floated. I was first reintroduced to it from some colleagues in Europe about a year and a half ago. It's an acronym, the letters VUCA, V-U-C-A. It has its heritage in the U.S. Defense Department back in the 80s, when there was still a little bit of a Cold War fear kind of thing going on, before President Reagan and Gorbachev tore down the wall and all that good stuff historically. But VUCA is an acronym that stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And boy, if that doesn't describe the current, you said geopolitical, but it also describes every business climate I've been in ever since. Leaders at the top of the house are wrestling with that. Things are volatile. They are definitely uncertain. The notion of making a 3-year plan and have it even sound like something that makes sense is almost ludicrous. Unless you're in a realm that has an incredibly long lead time. 1 year, 2 year, 3 year planning feels like a futile effort. And then you've got the ambiguity of what you're shooting for, the rapid pace of technology, so on and so on. You can just come up with dozens of examples. So I got to be honest, Daniel, you're probably the first guy I've heard that has described that overabundance of big rocks. And as you said that, it really did hit me that's a very good assessment, I think, of what we're up against. So it really does put a premium on the notion of creating a personal vision of where you want to go, because that's the only way you're going to know what could be important to that effort.
Yeah, I think, like, as much as we can hear this context, and again, when people say to me, this is where, this is what life is like now, I'm like, is it going to change? Of course not. Like, I can't see in the next 5 years that suddenly life has slowed down and become less complex. But I think we don't have to be terrified by that. We don't have to be fearful of it. We don't have to be overwhelmed by it. It just requires a change of mindset. And I actually think there's a lot of opportunities once you acknowledge that there's more to do than you'll ever get done. I liked how David Allen talked about committing to what you're not committing to. and the idea that actually we have to be better at committing to what will fall out of that kind of bucket and what will stay in. So that's ruthless prioritization based on, your values. But I think the real benefit is because you can't get it all done, we can just kind of give up on trying and put in what really matters. I remember chatting with the CEO, and they were absolutely smashed. They were exhausted, and I was actually brought into this team to work on team health. But in reality, the deeper I dived into understanding the team, everything pointed to the leader. They were micromanaging, they were shifting strategy, they were indecisive. They were really drowning the team with work, and they're not allowing the team to work well. And it all came down to, like, they had the skills, but they were just shattered. They were so tired, and they hadn't had a holiday for 2-3 years. Okay. So our professional recommendation was, you need to just put in a holiday and actually just have a month off and get your brain back in order. And then we'll have a conversation about how to lead the team. And I remember this person's response. They said, oh, look, right now I have so much work on and there's so much on my plate. I can't keep up. When life slows down, then I'll take a break. And guess what? I mean, it never happened. That person burnt out, the team kind of self-disintegrated in the end, and now they've got a new leader. But I think if you acknowledge the context we're in, then it's like, actually, I'm never going to slow down. So therefore, I'm going to put in my holidays, even if I don't have time. I'm going to have days off, even if I don't have time. I'm going to create rest for thinking deeply, for time with my family as a priority. And even if I can't keep up with the things I have to do at work, those things are more important. They're like foundation, kind of like breathing. If I don't do the basics, then there's no point working. And so the beauty of being in an environment where you accept that there's more than you'll ever get done is that there's no excuses anymore not to put the things first that matter. Because you'll never not be busy. And so I think it depends on mindset. It actually allows it to be easier in some ways to prioritize, even though it's painful to see, important things fall off and the messiness. I call it a messy garden. I'm a very type A, organized, structured person. And I once lived with a guy who was completely the opposite. And he used to just plant stuff everywhere, like random places there'd be like carrots and vegetables and yet, and I wanted everything in rows and squares and manicured. But he produced way more vegetables than I did. And in my mind, I'd say that life is a messy garden. When I get stressed out with all I can't do, I'm like, life is a messy garden. You produce more when you allow the mess, but it's the mindset of putting the most important things in first, ruthlessly prioritizing your time, saying no and not yet to a whole lot of stuff that others want you to do, and ensuring that you shape the life the way you feel you're meant to shape it. And that takes time and courage and identity, all that stuff, but it's important.
Yeah. Even before the pandemic struck, I was a fan of the theme of telling leaders to become intentional with their efforts. And even without thinking about all the complexities you're talking about, my argument was every human being that walks the face of the earth has one thing in common. Only one thing. Everything else is different, but one thing in common. We are all endowed with the same number of seconds in the day. And how we use those seconds is everything about what differentiates us as being impactful, powerful, successful, or not. And so it takes a degree of intentionality to spend those seconds in the day. And it's easy fodder to talk about characters like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos over here in America and what they're doing with their seconds in the day. And you compare that to anybody else that's out there trying to open the doors on a shop or run a business of some kind. And why aren't they multi-billion-dollar businesses,
But it's fascinating if you look at Elon Musk. I mean, I've read his biography and I think he's an extraordinary human being. I'm so thankful for rockets that go up into the sky that are cheaper and solar energy and all the, obviously electric cars. And yet I would not trade my life for his at any time. I remember I remember him, like how much he doesn't sleep. And I think you can see some of his sleeplessness coming out in some of his mistakes. I think when you look at maybe his relationship with his family and some of the stuff that you see on the news, there's a sense where I'm really grateful for those people who are willing to sacrifice everything other than work. But I also think that the majority of us who are leading want to have a great business. But part of that means that we have a family that love us and that we love, that we don't break down from total exhaustion constantly, and that we're likable people because we have a sense of kind of inner peace,
some sort of
rather than this
balance.
drivenness. So yeah, so I respect the unbalanced entrepreneurs who make billions and can change the world, even if their personal life is kind of a bit of a nightmare. But it's not necessarily who I want to be. And yeah, we can, I don't know, there's something in that.
but and thank you for saying that. I think that's an important distinction that everyone should consider. And it goes without saying, the history books on business success and outcomes are littered with leaders that did forsake their families for the success of the business. And even locally where I am, there's some business leaders over the years that have come and gone, and they accomplished some great things, maybe with the stock price of their company. But you look at their family life and you go, I want to do a little more on that front for me and my family, and so, but I think either way you lay that direction, we get back to that word intentionality, and being intentional about what we're doing. One of the things, I'm going to go back to what you were saying about the pandemic. One of the things I'm hearing a lot, and I think the data supports it, when everybody was sent home with the lockdown, business leaders were in a panic that everything's going to fall apart. The productivity will go through the floor. They won't get anything done. Margins will crash. But the data is telling us it did quite the opposite. The overall level of workforce productivity actually went up in just about every sector. And one of the best answers I've got for that is that people did go home. They wanted to still do a good job. But what people did, they lost their boundaries. They knew the kids were home, having to be homeschooled in some fashion. So there was a juggling act doing that. So they got into this do loop of saying, well, I got to focus these hours over here for my kids. So I'm going to reserve some other hours later in the day to make up my work. And so people were on their computers at 6 a.m. and didn't turn them off till 9 p.m., answering all those emails, doing all those small things that were cluttering the inbox, and just lost all sense of the boundary between work and home. And in the former model of leaving the house, doing some form of commute to go to a work site, that was a boundary that people could easily move in and out of. And I think everybody kind of lost sight of that during the lockdown. And now I think the pendulum is swinging a little bit. They're coming into a better, I started to say balance of that. I've actually abandoned the term work-life balance, which is what we always talked about before. I now go for the theme of work-life harmony.
I like work-life blend. I think it's a similar idea.
Yeah, we might have talked about that in the prep show. The blend or the harmony of it. The music is still going on both sides, and now you have to figure out how to navigate that.
And I think that makes intentionality, or what I call making space, even more important, because I agree. I think the new reality is hybrid is here to stay. I mean, workers want hybrid working. They want to work from home and work from the office. The blend has changed, and the way in which we work has changed, so that it's much more integrated with work and life. And so, yeah, it definitely makes it more important that we get really clear about what we value first, what we value most, that we make space for those things as a priority. And, my book is about digital technology and the impact that tech has on our ability to prioritize what matters most. So that requires that we think about our relationship with the online world, with work, with life. We put the most important things in first. So I think it just means we have to be even better at it than ever before. And again, in the research now is coming out that there are some behind that kind of productivity boom with working from home, pardon me, there are some things that now we're starting to realize that we've lost. I think in Australia, 82% of people say that their workplace is the primary place where they experience deep and meaningful relationships or interpersonal connection, even more than the home, the church, the football field. And so people are now just lonely. And a bit because Zoom doesn't replace face-to-face relationship. People are still struggling with space to think deeply and to think in the workplace. Even though they're at home, they're constantly smashed by notifications and they can't have focused time. Even though there's no one actually around them, they still can't disconnect from tech enough to not be distracted, just like they were in an open office, but probably on hyperdrive. And then rest is a really deep thing, particularly mental rest and resting the brain, which we need to understand as a form of rest, probably the most important form of rest for knowledge workers. And that's because we haven't learned to disconnect the blend of work and life, and we haven't learned to disconnect from tech. So I think the dark side of that productivity is definitely coming out in terms of our mental health, our anxiety, and our overwork stats. And yet the solution in my mind is to not go back to the old way necessarily, but to reshape our habits and to put the things that matter most.
I think that's brilliant. And I tell you what, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to dive a little more into this idea of how can you reshape the new normal and make it be effective for you. We'll be right back.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's DougThorpe.com.
Well, hello again, everyone. We're back, and today I'm talking with Daniel Sih, and we are talking about the idea of how to make space in this volatile, too busy world that we're in. In the first half, we talked about being intentional and trying to really reshape your own lens for the priorities that you must put in your life. But one of the aspects, as we kind of went on break, we were talking about the impact of technology. And during the break, I was telling him the story, and he encouraged me to share it here with everybody. I always thought of myself as a guy that wasn't all that particularly hooked, albeit I'm an early adopter of everything technology since the Palm Pilot came out. But I didn't know how bad it was until a couple of nights ago. I went to dinner with my wife and some friends, and I realized I'd left my phone at home. And I was in a kind of a withdrawal mode for about 45 minutes until my wife calmly reminded me I still had my Apple Watch on. And if anything important was going to happen, I would get the alert on the watch. So I wasn't totally unconnected or disconnected, but only in my mind. So I think that's an entry point, Daniel, for let's talk about the technology side of it. How are you talking to people about the play of technology in their lives?
So look, I've always been passionate about making space and helping people be intentional in what they put in their cup first and what they leave out and how to shape their life around their values and calling. And yet, really like when the iPhone hit that kind of saturation in the US market and I think about 2011, 2012, and I started to notice the shift in my habits, how much I was online and how much others were online, and started to notice the trend of what we did with our space. I realized that we will never win the battle of space and time in this busy world unless we rethink our relationship with technology, because when we look at that analogy again of that big rock, you've got a container, and it's your capacity, your finite time and energy to put stuff in, whether that be work or life or dropping kids off to soccer or watching Netflix episodes. The reality is that the majority of us are putting an extraordinary amount of that kind of space is being filled by technology. I think the average American is on screens about 9 to 12 hours a day. People like yourself, myself, like people who are entrepreneurs are on that kind of 12 hours a day. And I mean, that's a lot of life. There's not much left, right? I read a stat that in America, the average 21-year-old male has done 10,000 hours of online gaming by 21 years old. Wow. And if you remember Malcolm Gladwell's like magic number for self-mastery, 10,000 hours is what allows you to be like amazing at anything, fluent in French. You can play any instrument. You can do an undergraduate degree and an honors degree, maybe even a master's in 10,000 hours. But all you've learnt is World of Warcraft or Minecraft or whatever it is. Right. Does that make sense? Right. And so it's not that we don't have time. We're filling it with Instagram, Facebook, TikTok videos. We're filling it with scrolling information, whether it be the share market or the CNN or Fox News. Do you know what I mean? We're filling our life with an extraordinary amount of digital stuff. And it's not that stuff's bad. I'm not anti-tech at all. I love that I can work from home right now, in my Ugg boots and talk with you on the other side of the world. However, it's about what we're flowing in and flowing out of our cup. And the problem is when we put in tech first, a lot of it is actually not very meaningful. And the stuff that is typically flowing out is physical exercise, time in nature, spending quality time with our kids, just being present, hanging out with friends in real life, which gives us kind of a deep sense of community and richness, religion or time in religious activities. We're losing time for reading books and simply being still and examining the inner life and thinking about the thoughts and the feelings that we've had throughout the day, which is what we need to do as leaders to know where we're heading and why we react the way we are. We're basically losing everything other than tech, and that's shaping our mind, it's shaping our habits, and it's damaging our long-term mental health, happiness, and productivity. And so we have to rethink our relationship with the online world, the story behind why we are so drawn to our tech, not just the tech itself, but the beliefs and paradigms that lead us there in order to shift our behaviors and live more intentionally. Does that make sense?
It does. And I, like you, I am nowhere close to trying to sound like I want to belittle the tech influence in our life or be anti-tech. Because again, I historically, anybody can tell you, I've been an early adopter of everything. Even back in my banking days, when the IT people came up with a new technology that was available, I raised my hand. I said, my department will do it. We'll take it on. We were always the test bed for everything. I'm sure some of my employees didn't appreciate it, but I did. I thought it was the right thing to do. But I think the challenge is we don't realize how incredibly addictive some of that behavior can be. And I know there have been documentaries produced that are just that. They're ex-Silicon Valley people that are saying, watch out, there's a plan here. There are things going on you need to be aware of. And as a human being, you can fight it. But if you're not aware and not sensitive to that tug to, well, let me just take one more tweet, let me look at one more post, let me look at one more page, and then I'll close my eyes and go to bed. It's hard. It's really hard.
Absolutely. I remember having a chat with a senior executive, and he told me this story, and I've always remembered it. And so Gil was, one day he was just looking out of the window at a morning tea break, I don't know, with a coffee in hand and maybe a muffin. And one of his colleagues from the executive leadership team walked past his office and, looked in and gave a sarcastic remark. He said, "Oh, Gil, I see you're working real hard. You're earning the big bucks there, hey?" And Gil turned around, looked at him very calmly and said, "Actually, I'm doing my most important work. And he looked out of the window, put his feet up, and just kept staring out of the window. And he wasn't actually being sarcastic. What he was saying is, he is a leader who leads, hundreds of people. His job is actually to think about the future, about the strategies, about the interpersonal relationships, about how to set culture. I mean, you really are paid to think at that level, and yet most leaders don't think. And the interesting thing about thinking is it doesn't look like work. It looks like staring out of the window with your feet up, with a coffee in hand, having a muffin. Does that make sense?
It does.
Or walking.
It does.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded, I was working with one of the senior executives at ExxonMobil at their Houston headquarters, and we had been on a rhythm of, I would show up at his office every 2 weeks, and we would have our times together. And one day I showed up, and he said, "We got to go outside." And I said, "Okay, it's, this is your time, whatever you want to do, let's go." And I said, "Where do you want to go?" And he said, "Just outside." and then they have a absolutely gorgeous campus, well manicured lawns and beautiful plants and wildlife out there. And we went out and sat on a bench under a tree, and he said, "Now let's have our discussion." And he said, I was at a place, I had to get my head clear. This is the right thing to do, and let's do this. And I said, "Sure." So it does, but probably to the casual observer, we didn't have laptops, we didn't have our phones on, we were sitting there just talking, and no telling what people concluded was really going on there that moment.
So that's one example. I mean, I like the expression, you have to get out of the box to get out of the box thinking, or fresh ideas happen with fresh air. It's the same idea. But I suppose I shared that story because that's just one example about the idea that you'll never get deep thought if you don't turn off your tech. Like, if Gil was to have his screen in his hand, scrolling whatever happened to be on the internet, well, then he's not thinking strategically or deeply or reflectively. Okay. And yet nowadays, the majority of us don't stare out the window. We actually pull out our screen. And so as much as tech is helpful, and, I agree with all the addictive design and all that type of stuff, but from my perspective, from a productivity kind of perspective, the key is to make space for deep thought, for real relationships, and for deep rest. And they're the three areas where we are desperately losing space because of our habit of reaching for the phone. And so, in fact, if you don't disconnect and unplug regularly for some things in a habitual and regular way, annually, weekly, daily, which is what my book talks about, how to actually unplug and reframe your habits and put stuff in first that really matters. If you don't do that stuff, you'll actually end up being a media multitasker. You'll make bad decisions. You'll be tired. You'll damage relationships. And so too much of a good thing is actually a bad thing. And the best way to destroy the use of productivity in your life is to overuse it and never unplug. And yet most of us need to be intentional now to unplug, because life online is the norm.
It's
and
automatic.
therefore we have to be intentional in learning how to unplug post-COVID. And that's a new reality for humans. And it's actually a new set of skills, which I call the space making skills.
Go back to those three key areas you said that needed to be thought about.
Yeah, so I think so deep thought, and that involves spirituality and examining the inner life. Contemplation has always been a critical part of maturity, of having the confidence and conviction of knowing who you are,
Whole
where
societies have
and why
spun
you're
off
doing
from that.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
Deep thought.
Absolutely. If you never, most of us reach for our phone first thing in the morning and last thing at night. We hear other people's thoughts. We hear bad news from the media. We don't think our own thoughts. And I think a lot of the anxiety, this ambient anxiety in our society, and the deep anger, the unforgiveness, the lack of being able to see other people's perspectives, it all arises from not actually knowing how to think deeply and reflectively about your own behavior and the world around you, or even taking the information from a podcast like this, not just listening to it, but taking the space to think about how it relates, what you agree with, what you disagree with, and how you might apply it in your life, which is called wisdom as opposed to information or knowledge. So anyway, the first one is deep thought. The second one is real relationships. So actually carving out space, let's say, a digital free meal around the table where you eat together with, with your family, for example, every day as a sacrosanct habit without tech, or where you connect with people in real life on a regular basis without pulling out your phone. It's a completely different experience than connecting through social media, from the research and from just logic. And the third one, so I said deep thought and reflection, relationships. The other one is deep rest, and the idea that actually in our society we practice skills to work well, which I call the skills of keeping pace. And yet I actually think the hardest skill set nowadays, in the context we've talked about, is making space, is the skills of resting deeply, both physically but also mentally, particularly when you're a knowledge worker like you and I. What might it look like to rest our mind and to do activities that are the opposite to what we're doing at work? Whereas what most of us are doing is we're working on a screen and then we're resting on a screen. And I always say that the brain, from a neuroplastic perspective, can't tell the difference between Outlook and Instagram. We need to rethink what rest means actually in the digital age, in a hybrid blended working environment where even our workplace is the same as our like rest place. What might it look like to orientate our life very, very differently, at least once a week on a day off, and to practice the skills of deep rest? And those three things combined will transform your life, your family, your business, your productivity. And without them, you're just a cyborg running from one thing to the next, running to stand still like everyone else.
I think that's so rich. So deep thinking, deep relationship, and deep rest basically is it. In, pardon my paraphrase, but
I like it.
That is rich. And boy, I'm sitting here, I'm playing some tapes of my last 5 years and some things that have developed in my life, and that is all of those are very true. When I think about the deep thought, when I talk about coaching leaders, we do frequently talk about setting a vision and having that bigger picture mindset that you can lead a group forward. You can't get there without some of that deep thinking. You just can't do it. It's not possible, because you have to ask the questions, what if, what about, why not, all those kind of questions, which if you give them their just reward, those are some deep thoughts, and you need to peel those onions to really come up with something that has any substantive meaning.
And you're talking about deep strategic thinking, so knowing like where you're heading in like a slightly bigger picture, and I totally agree with you. And yet I also think that the application of where you want to head and the setting of culture requires regular small amounts of deep thought. So it's like, let me reflect on the kind of narky exchange that happened in that meeting the other day or today. Why did that happen? And maybe I need to find out, how is Doug feeling? Or maybe I need to interject in this relationship, or maybe this person needs some more guidance. Like that, the application of the texture of how we apply our strategies will only happen if we're thinking on an emotional level, a relational level, a strategic level every day, just in little ways. Even if it's a 1 hour walk at lunchtime where you just think about the things of your day, your work, your family, and how the data of the day shapes your next actions. Even if it's to stop and reflect between tasks just for 5 minutes and think, what's next best? Now, what's best next, I think, is Matt Pavan's kind of comment. What would be the next best thing I could do, rather than just open email and react to what's there? So it's this constant pattern in your life where you make a little bit of space to think deeply and reflect on where you're heading. And that's what makes a good leader.
Well, and for anybody that has chosen a course to say, I want to be a better leader, here are the things I want to work on, you have to have that daily reflection of what it was you did that day. And if you had 3 opportunities to have meaningful dialogues with people, 2 of them went well, 1 didn't, why not? What was it about that one that didn't work as well as the other 2 did? You have to inform your thinking so that you can make those changes and add that developmental progress to the things you're doing. So yeah, I like that. This could go on for a while. I I'm just really inspired, Daniel. Oh, okay. One thing I do want to pack in here, and we'll probably have to bring it to a close soon, but you said something a moment ago about multitasking, and a lot of the neuroscience reports that I've read over the last couple of years, as they've come out, and there's been a lot more brain science studies. There's a whole body of science that says, on a very technical basis, you cannot multitask. Our brains are not wired for multitasking. It's a single fire, single wire event. Now, those happen in nanosecond speeds. So can you flip from one idea to the next back and forth? Okay, yes. But in terms of being truly productive, when you think you have two or three things going on at the same time, you're not. That's the bottom line. So the teaching that has started to emerge from that is, and it's kind of back to what you were alluding to with Covey, look at the big rocks, take the one big rock, choose the one, work on that. Don't get distracted. Don't load up with these other things. And just because your phone is blowing up, if you've already started the work on this one thing, stay the course, stay focused, and don't keep bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, look, I agree. I think multitasking and attention management is one of the core skills we need to learn as leaders in the digital age. Stephen Covey has a top-down approach. So work out your vision, your values, your personal mission, and then bring it down to your weekly big rocks, you see most important things, and then drag it to the present. David Allen, who wrote Getting Things Done, who is the other kind of big guru in this productivity field from the 90s, says do the opposite. He says you'll never be able to get to vision and values. Imagine like an airplane kind of trying to get off the runway to the higher levels. You'll never be able to get to the top levels if you don't clear the runway. And so for him, you've got to actually manage email. And now I would say notifications and screen-based habits, because if you're clogged at that runway level, you can't get to the higher planes. And I think we have to be working on both at the same time. And the reason I say that, for example, is we can say, yeah, let's try to focus on one thing or even three things rather than 20 things. But if we have email notifications and WhatsApp and Facebook, and we set ourselves up for constant distraction, the inbuilt nature of the technologies will stop us from ever not being distracted and having multiple things going at the same time, because of the nature of the iPhone, which is actually a multitasking device. And whenever the medium is the message, whenever we use a device that has the idea of multitasking embedded in its design, irrespective of the apps we use, then our brain, when we practice the internet 9 to 12 hours a day, will actually end up being a multitasking vehicle, just like if we were to practice the piano 12 hours a day. So all I'm saying is we need to both know our values in the big picture and draw it back into the present, like Covey said, but we also need to be really ruthless at reducing the distraction of our devices, physically putting them away, and actually removing ourselves from all that kind of runway stuff so that we can actually lift our head to the higher plane. So it's more complex than it used to be, but I think with the right skills, we can still make space to think deeply and rest fully and reconnect with loved ones away from a screen.
I like that. And it actually reminds me of another tool that I've used with a lot of my clients. There's a little 4-blocker grid that talks about it helps in that clearing the runway thing. When you've got the pile of minutia coming at you, it helps to stratify and categorize that. And this 4-blocker, I'm thinking, is attributed to Dwight Eisenhower, from World War II fame. It's the difference between urgent and important, the intersection there. And there's only one box that is both urgent and important. And as the model is taught, for all the things you've got going on around you, there really is only 25% that can sit in that box at any one time, urgent and important. Everything else needs to get distributed to the other 3 boxes. And when you get down to that one box that's not urgent, not important, guess what? Delete it. Hit the delete button and, just let it go.
No more cat videos. So
Yeah, right. No more cat videos.
yeah, and I remember hearing it that if you live in the first quadrant, so Covey stole Eisenhower's and kind of popularized it. If you live in that urgent and important space, everything's urgent and it's important, then you end up so exhausted you actually drift towards the non-urgent, non-important space. And we see that all the time. You go to work, you're smashed constantly, everything's adrenaline rushed and cortisol filled. And so then you watch cat videos for hours on end, and so
Yeah.
somehow we've got to get to that magic box of not yet urgent, but important. And that will kind of pull back that kind of reactive
Get it all
workspace,
done.
which again is about making space for the things that really matter.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're saying the same thing in just multiple different ways.
Well, Daniel, this has been great, and I think we need to go ahead and wrap it up. And who knows, I may invite you for a second episode here. This is, I think there's a lot of meat on this bone that we need to be able to talk about and hopefully help people with. And I certainly do hope that listeners find this valuable and helpful for them. So tell us how people can get a hold of you if they're looking for the book or want to hear more.
Yeah, so look, I'm at spacemakers.com.au. The AU's for Australia. And look, I'd love to have a conversation with you. You can just book a 15-minute conversation if interested, or book an online training session for your team. I run keeping pace training like Email Ninja, how to get your inbox to zero each day, or the List Assassin stuff, which is a kind of getting things done methodologies, and Priority Samurai, which is the Stephen Covey type stuff. So I kind of tools to get you off the runway. And then I have making space training. So how do you actually unplug and have digital wellness as a habit across your teams? So there's lots of different courses we run online. They're usually 3 to 4 hours. And I'd love
great.
to hear from you.
Well, we'll have all that in the show notes here if you need to catch that and come back and look at it again. So one more time, Daniel, thank you so much. This has been great.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show. Bye, Doug.
And I do want to remind everybody, if you're listening via audio, that this show is on video over at the YouTube channel of the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. And check us out over there. Subscribe to the channel. You'll get your notices when we have new content coming out. It's been a pleasure having you here with us. So we hope you found this valuable. Share it with your friends. Hit a couple of comments. Let us know what you thought. And I hope to see you again soon. For now, we'll say goodbye.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.